Good evening, and thank you for attending. This is a departure from our usual meeting, but we felt that the subject was important enough to share with anyone who was interested. My name is Robin Dodge, and I will be your moderator this evening. Allow us to provide you with some guidelines for the presentation. Our purpose here tonight is to provide you with verifiable facts so that you can make an informed decision. And we are aware that the presenters here tonight may not share your opinion, but we will ask everyone here to remain respectful of the rights of others to speak. The agenda for tonight is straightforward. Our four panelists will speak briefly, and then we will all have time for questions. If you have a question, as most of you know, you were provided an index card. And if you would like to write your question on the index card and just raise your hand, we will take the card. If you need another one, just let us know. You may ask up to 4 questions. There will be no comments or questions from the floor, and the moderator will read the questions to the panel. As we've all just bowed our heads to acknowledge God, I am comfortable in asking you to follow the 11th commandment of our Savior and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you cannot comply with these requests, we will be forced to ask you to leave. So thank you very much. Our first speaker from the panel will be Dr. Kelly Kohls.
Good evening, and thanks for the invite from the Greater Dayton Women's Republican Club. I appreciate that. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but I have been an educator, a parent of 5 children educated in the public system, and a school board member for 2 school districts. So I had some on-the-job training along with raising my children and seeing some things inside the district. Once on the district, I learned a lot of things that I think parents and citizens need to know and understand. I absolutely love children. You can ask anybody. I wanted a dozen of them, but my husband was a party pooper at 5. I absolutely adore teaching children and educating children. I think that it is the most important job that we as adults have, or at least one of them. So, of course, I want it to be done correctly. So let me give you some information, and that's all you have to walk away with, is some information. It's from a variety of sources. For the most part, my slides are from the Ohio Department of Education, and CERB, and experts, international experts, national experts, and Ohio experts, who have some things to say, and I think we should listen. Let me see if I can do this. Be smarter than oh, by the way, I know there's a grammar error on there. I thought I corrected it, but it disappeared. Okay, so listen. Academics in the U.S. Is our problem funding? Is our problem spending? Does more money relate to any measure of success? Well, I understood there's been several articles written about this lately in the mainstream media, indicating that the answer is no. But let's just go further. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is international. Internationally, where do we rank as a country? Nationally, where does Ohio rank? Within Ohio, and the kids are the cash. So just looking at PISA. PISA is the Program for International Student Assessment. It assesses every 3 years and then publishes in the following year. This assessment started in 2000. So since 2000, the United States was 7th in reading. As you can see, 18th in mathematics, 14th in science. As you can see, as the time progresses, the United States does a little poorer each time we take the test. In 2015, they added 5 more education systems. I'm not calling them countries because many of them are just subsets within a country. And, they added in the last test, which was conducted in 2018, published in 2019, there were 79 education systems. And since that happened, our scores then are a little skewed because we did better than some of those countries that were added, or education systems that were added. And then in some of them we didn't do as well. We did better and we didn't do as well. So we did some of both. What was a little frustrating to see in the results in the 2015 experiment was we were 49th lowest in children being happy in our school systems. U.S. scores slid. Now this is somebody else's, when I put it in quotes, it's somebody else's words. But little is said in the media. It's a little disappointing. Just now we're starting to see the media pick up on some of the information that citizens need to know and write a few of these articles. I forgot, somebody just told me tonight that one was just published in, now I forget the literature, but there was one in the Cleveland Press. Okay, so in 2010, the U.S. News and World Reports wrote, "We must fire bad teachers, hiring good teachers than firing bad ones," their quote. 2013, a little bit of media coverage from NPR stating that the U.S. students slid in global ranking on math and reading and science. Not much is said, like I said. 2015, U.S. falls or slips again. Media coverage almost non-existent. International expert weighs in. So, the United States was first in the world as recently as 20 years ago, said Barry McGaugh, Director of Education for the Paris-based Organization for Cooperation and Development. McGaugh said that the United States remains atop of the knowledge economy, one that uses information to produce economic benefits, but he said, education's contribution to that economy is weakening and you ought to be concerned. You ought to be worried. McGaugh also says, they show that compared with their peers in Europe, Asia, and elsewhere, 15-year-olds in the United States are below average in applying math skills to real-life tests. Given what the United States spends on education, its relatively low student achievement through high school shows its school system is clearly inefficient. Okay, then in 2015, Congressman Bratt said, over 30 years, federal spending on education has grown by 375%, but test scores remain flat. The chairman of the House Education and Labor Committee that year, Representative George Miller, a Democrat from California, called it deeply troubling that high schoolers were not making meaningful gains on the test. U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, as you know, was Obama's Secretary of Education, said that in 2014 that NAEP, which is our National Standardized Test, results underscore a need to reject educational stagnation in our high schools. U.S. News and World Reports again in 2018 for the PISA, so the one that was just recently taken. 28 million students, 79 education systems. U.S. students show no improvement in math, reading, and science on international exam. Most troubling among the results was that an international performance gap in education is widening. Most troubling to researchers is that 30 countries scored higher than the U.S. students in math, and that performance gap between top performing and lower performing students widening, especially in reading. By the way, all of these education systems doing better on this PISA test, none of them used the Common Core. The Common Core education scheme was forced on all states in 2009 up until today, when it still exists. National Assessment of Education Progress, that's the NAEP we often refer to when we look at how states are doing on that standardized test. It's a national standardized test. Okay, also known as NAEP or Nation's Report Card. 600,000 students, 4th and 8th grade students take that test. We'll look at the PISA versus NAEP. U.S. News and World Reports, the results largely mirror the top-line findings in the most recent results from the National Assessment of Education Progress, which last month showed that math and reading scores dropping for 4th and 8th grade students in the U.S. National Reading Emergency, they called it. Educators sound the alarm. This isn't just, propaganda from political people. The educators are sounding the alarm. Not only did scores drop for students in many states, but the achievement gap is widening. Again, NAEP, students in the U.S. are getting worse at reading, math, and a dozen education and civic rights organizations, civil rights organizations, sounded the alarm this time over what they say is a national crisis. John King, CEO of the Education Trust and former Education Secretary of the Obama administration, said in a statement, the persistent gaps in reading achievement of students from low-income backgrounds, students of color, English learners, and students with disabilities on the NAEP requires urgent action. Everyone agrees. This is from a high school teacher, wrote this as an op-ed in the paper. Common Core and other education reforms pushed by billionaires and thinky tanks, his words, not mine, thinky tanks and politicians and a variety of other non-educators were going to turn this all around. They haven't. This comes as no surprise or zero surprise to actual educators. It's just one more data point showing that all of the reform heaped on education since A Nation at Risk is not producing the promised results. U.S. Department of Education, the results are frankly devastating, said U.S. Education Secretary, the current one, Betsy DeVos. About the... No, that's just rude. We have respect for Arnie Duncan, but not Betsy DeVos, come on.
Yeah.
Anyway, this country is in a student achievement crisis, and over the past decade, it has continued to worsen, especially for our most vulnerable students. 2 out of 3 of our nation's children aren't proficient readers. In fact, 4th grade reading declined in 17 states, and 8th grade reading declined in 31. ACT is one of our best barometers of student progress, and our college-bound kids are doing worse than they have in the ACT's history, said Center for Education Reform CEO Jeannie Allen in a statement. But because the people in charge of U.S. education not only neither lose power nor credibility, but actually profit when American kids fail, we can only expect things to get worse. Everyone agrees, from any part of the education continuum, any part of the political continuum. We have far right to far left. They're all saying the same things. I don't think we should deny that. From 1970 to 2012, the number of students grew by 8.6%, while the number of non-teaching personnel increased by 130%. Teaching staff grew by 60%, and all staff grew by 84%. 10 times more public education employees growth than student growth. Since 2012, staffing surge has continued. We're looking at this chart now, a pretty good chart. And I always have the reference at the bottom. So this will be published, this whole PowerPoint will be published, the whole video will be published on a lot of different Facebook pages, but one in particular will be Children First Education. But I'll publish this. The solid line at the top is the total cost of education since the 1970s, skyrocketing. The second line is the number of employees in the system, skyrocketing. What's down at the bottom is the reading, math, and science scores. What's next is, this is a chart just showing kind of what I just said, the number of people in the system increasing. Now, there is an organization that benefits by increasing these numbers of people in the system. I want you to think about that. It wouldn't be the students. As shown in my study, this is from Vince Scafidi, author of the School Staffing Surge, told CNSnews.com, student achievement in public schools did not rise between 1970 and 2008, even though staffing skyrocketed. Study, no links between school spending and student achievement from the Cato Institute. Again, I'm going to go a little faster because we want to get on to the other speakers, but all of this will be published, all these slides, on Children First Education Facebook page and many other places. Perhaps Ohio is different. Let's just look. Challenges of public school funding in Ohio, Chart A. Now, the blue line is enrollment in Ohio schools, public schools, over time. The, let's see here. The kind of magenta line, because the data only goes up to 2017, we don't have 2018 and 2019 yet, but you could guesstimate where that line would continue. The magenta line is median household income, and the changes over time. Now, the green is total expenditures in our public school system. The red is state revenue per pupil, and the yellow is total revenue per pupil. Now, if you look at these charts, please understand that we've got people whose median household income stays below, far below usually, the inflation. But yet our rate of spending in education has far exceeded anybody's ability to keep up. So we have people in every community who are objecting to more being taken out of their pocket for a system that's not producing the results. And of course they have the right to object because it is more. It's not just a latte. It's not just a pizza. It's a meal. It's a prescription that they need to live. It's important to them. And as you can see, as you keep taking more and more and more out of their pockets, they can't do it. Something has to break. Something will break. And unfortunately, the system that we've got right now is breaking apart communities. It pits neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend, family against family. Because some people think, yes, you can do more. You've got it. What? Have you looked at this? Let's keep going. Now, let's look at the results, though. Over that same amount of time, we're looking at 4th grade and 8th grade math and reading. No changes. But we've shuffled a whole lot of resources into the system. But there have been no changes in these test scores. Now, how does that rank according to the national NAEP? Well, let's look. Nationally, which is the gray, that's how students perform. Well, Ohio's a little bit higher than that. But Ohio students still don't reach proficient, which is the top yellow line. We'll look at 4th grade math. Same thing in Ohio. We'll look at 8th grade reading. Same thing in Ohio. Still same problems. We cannot get our students to reach proficient in these scores. I looked at Bellbrook just for laughs, and I was trying to think, well, blue, sure, why not? Why not investigate specific schools that while we're sitting right here? Let's look at this. So just look at this. Blue. The blue line is enrollment. The change in enrollment over time. The red is inflation. The yellow is median household income. Do you see how the households are not able to keep up with inflation? They're not able to keep a lifestyle that they'd like to have. Okay? Then when you look at the kind of the green, whatever, what do you call that, guys? Green, light green, total revenue per pupil. And the magenta is teacher raises. These are all going to be published on a lot of Facebook pages, guys. Centerville local. Centerville local, let's just look at that. So the blue again is enrollment. It's going down. The yellow again is median household income. The magenta, or fuchsia we call it, is inflation. There's total revenue. And then there's teacher raises. Ohio teacher salaries are 3rd highest in the country when you account for cost of living. Conclusion, nationally and in Ohio, more money, same problems. Showering public schools with funds has been a costly failure. Why not try something new? Thanks, guys. Next, Beth Lear. So the video will be shown too, the one that's right here. If you don't like it, you can leave. He has every right. You're in a public building. We have every right too. Do what you will. Go ahead, Beth.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Beth Lear, and I am here to talk to you about education from Dewey to DeRolf and beyond. In early America, during the colonial period, the Bible was the single most important cultural influence in the lives of Anglo-Americans, according to Dr. Lawrence Kremen. Early U.S. education was predominantly a private system that included the home, perhaps a school, church, sometimes library societies, apprenticeships, and self-study. Children were often taught to read at home before they were subjected to the rigors of school. In middle-class families where the mother would be expected to be literate, this was considered part of her duties. according to Ralph Walker, author of Old Readers in Early American Life. And President John Adams famously stated, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." The Judeo-Christian worldview is the foundation of our nation. It's defined as having historical roots in both Judaism and Christianity, according to Webster, hence the name Judeo-Christian. The foundation of the Declaration and the U.S. Constitution are in the Judeo-Christian worldview, but an anathema to education reformers like John Dewey and his friends at the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School has had a tremendous influence on our modern education system. In the early 1900s, it was created in Moscow by the Bolsheviks. It was officially founded in Germany by a Marxist professor named Karl Grunberg in 1923. The Frankfurt School moved to the US, and from their new home in New York City, their subversive ideas would be espoused and eventually infect the entire planet like a deadly cancer, mostly through the education system, wrote journalist Alex Newman. What subversive ideas did they bring to the American education system? A cultural revolution espousing collectivism, which is another word for socialism, communism, or in our modern parlance, identity politics. How to subvert the great American experiment. The program created to subvert America involved, quote, the destruction of traditional religion and the Christian culture it produced, the collapse of sexual morality, and the deliberate undermining of the family, and a wrecking ball to infiltrate and demolish the existing institutions. John Dewey, having established himself as an educator and philosopher in the US and using Rockefeller money, played a key role in bringing the Frankfurt School philosophy to America. Dewey was anti-Christian and pro-humanism. His goal, to subvert the Judeo-Christian worldview through education and replace it with a progressive collectivist mindset. Thus begins the great, or not so great, education experiment. Experimenting on children, creating new theories, replacing tried and true methods. Kelly already revealed the devastating evidence. America's standing in the world in education has been falling for decades. Maybe we just need more money. Sometimes it is all about the money. And Ohio tried to resolve this issue through a court case in 1997, DeRolf versus the state of Ohio. I'm curious if the audience would be willing to participate. How many of you believe that our education system is still unconstitutional and that the court has said it is still unconstitutional? I'm not at all surprised. That's exactly what you hear in the media and many other places. But the reality is, the court in 2003, March of 2003, after making the decision in 1998, and again in 2000, again 2001, and again 2002, all 4 times declaring it was unconstitutional, said it was no longer unconstitutional. I'm only telling you what the court said. The state had finally thrown enough money at the problem, raising the bottom high enough that they would no longer agree to continue to consider the case. And they considered it finished, and we were free to go our way. They didn't touch property taxes, did they? No. Just to give you a quote from ohiohistorycentral.org, in case you want to look it up. Unfortunately for state officials, the Ohio Supreme Court provided no real guidance on how to create a constitutional school funding system. The legislature, instead of implementing an entire overhaul of the system, simply authorized more state funds to schools. But the court eventually determined that the Ohio government had made a good faith effort to change public school funding and the justices overturned their earlier rulings. So, if our funding system is constitutional, why are our students still struggling? Because it really isn't as much about the money as it is about how it's spent. If you go to the Ohio Department of Education website, you can see graphs that show you how much money we're spending on education and how it is continuing to go up, although we did have a dip during the Great Recession. The thing was that money was covered by the federal government in terms of stimulus funds. So why aren't students achieving if we're continuing to fund it? Education elites have discarded the tried and true methods, and they that have worked for centuries, and they've been experimenting on our kids. An experimental plan by any other name is still an experiment. Whether you call it outcome-based education or evidence-based education or Common Core, they are all similar, and they're based upon teaching students what to think instead of teaching them how to think. These so-called methods are based upon the progressive humanistic worldview of Dewey and decades of his acolytes in higher ed that view America, individualism, and Christianity as the problem. Their solution was the same as Dewey's: collectivism, socialism, humanism. The view in so many of our higher education establishments is that we cannot educate, we must indoctrinate. How many of you have taught from Howard Zinn? Howard Zinn wrote a book for history education. It is glaringly false. It is a total misrepresentation of American history from the perspective of somebody who despises this country. Other issues that we have indoctrinating in the schools: comprehensive sex education, which includes literal pornographic how-to guides.
Oh my God.
It does. Look it up on Planned Parenthood's website. They will be happy to show you. They not only teach kids as young as 4th grade how to have sex, they teach them anal sex and oral sex. Clearly, there are a lot of you who have no idea what's going on in your classroom, or you approve of it. So the other thing that we have going on in our classrooms is the requirement that teachers now become counselors, with this huge push for social emotional learning. So schools aren't just for education anymore. At the state level, our superintendent introduced and our state board approved a 5-year plan. Only half of that plan is academic in nature. Of the 4 learning domains, 2 of them are based on non-academic issues. Leadership and reasoning is one, and social emotional learning is the other. If only half of schooling is for academics, what else is being taught? Well, the social emotional learning that has become such a huge component today, which, by the way, whether you're told this or not, the 5-year plan says it will be assessed, and they are assessing it in other states. It's defined as the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. That's according to Castle, and they are the collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning. Castle has been in Ohio for a while. They've actually been in the Cleveland municipal system since 2011, and the entire reason that Cleveland collaborated with Castle was because they wanted to improve their graduation rates. And most of you in here can probably understand that. Any of the big 8s are really struggling to get their kids out of school with an education where they can actually work and get a good wage. Unfortunately, Castle had no success. That was almost 10 years ago. The graduation rates in Cleveland have not changed in all that time. And yet Castle is going to be one of the major winners of the $645 million in social emotional learning funds. Let's go back to your new favorite issue, since I just learned this a few minutes ago, comprehensive sex education. Did you know that Ohio Revised Code 3313.6011 actually requires venereal disease education to emphasize sexual abstinence, and that is the only protection that it works 100% of the time? But comprehensive sex education does not focus on abstinence, and most of those plans do not teach it at all. It's a comprehensive how-to guide. And Planned Parenthood considers any abstinence program to be a, quote, sex-shaming values agenda. So what do they actually teach our kids instead of academics? Planned Parenthood is the largest provider of sex ed in the United States. They cover pregnancy and HIV prevention. They cover LGBTQ sexual how-tos. They cover consent, teaching our children as young as 4th graders how to say yes to sexual activity and when. They share birth control ideas.
I came here to listen to this, and you're acting like you're in junior high school.
Yeah.
She's up here speaking. You should be nice enough to listen to what she has to say and wait till your turn and write on the card if you have a comment.
They promote exploration, and they promote the idea that you can be any gender you want. This is from their website, not me. What is sex? Sex is a label that usually first given by a doctor based upon genes, hormones, and body parts, like genitals, you're born with. It goes on your birth certificate and describes your body as female or male. Some people's sex doesn't fit into male or female, called intersex. What is gender, according to Planned Parenthood, and what do they teach your children? Gender is how society thinks we should look, think, and act as girls and women and boys and men. Each culture has beliefs and informal rules about how people should act based on their gender. For example, many cultures expect and encourage men to be more aggressive than women. And what does Planned Parenthood say about gender identity? It is how you feel inside and how you show your gender through clothing, behavior, and personal appearances. It's a feeling that begins early in life. So help! Parents and students want academics, not social engineering. Teachers deserve the opportunity to teach what students need in a classroom at a regular classroom pace when their kids need to move on, not teaching to a test. Since every student is not the same, different school environments are needed. Districts, charter schools, vouchers, private schools, homeschool. Which should we choose? My suggestion to you is that the best thing for our kids is an all of the above. Education is supposed to be about the students. And we have taken our eye off the ball for far too long. Sweden has actually moved from a top-down government-run system to universal vouchers. Senator Andrew Brenner, from whom you'll hear, introduced House Bill 102 last General Assembly to create a system that would allow money to follow the child. A bill is going to be introduced in the Ohio House within the next week or two. It's called the Student Teacher Liberty Act, that would replace Common Core with a content-based, standards-aligned, norm reference test system, something similar to the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. That would be one test, not a bunch of tests, and the teachers would have the time and the ability to teach their kids the way they need to. and teacher evaluations would be at the local level, not state-run. Once again, I just want to encourage you, the focus needs to be on our kids. The money should follow the student, and the classroom control must be returned to teachers and taken away from the state and outside interests. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. How are you all doing this evening? I'm State Senator Andrew Brenner. I represent the 19th Ohio Senate District. That covers part of Franklin County, which is City of Columbus schools, Delaware County and Knox County, which includes Mount Vernon and East Knox. And if you take a look at the school districts that I represent, they're very diverse from the urban to rural school systems. I also have two of the school districts that are the fastest growing in student population in the state of Ohio. One of my school districts, Olentangy, is funded, is pretty much capped due to caps and guarantees, which I'm going to talk about, but they're the fastest growing in the state of Ohio. They're gaining about 700 to 800 students per year in student growth due to all the people moving into the school district. But I've served on the Education Committee when I was in the Ohio House for 8 years. I served as the Vice Chair and Chair there. I'm currently the Vice Chair of the Senate Education Committee, and I'm also the Primary and Secondary Finance Subcommittee Chair. I was appointed to both that and the Vice Chair back in October of this last year. As you all probably know, Ohio has about 1.7 million students. About 500,000 of them use school choice. Almost all of that is from traditional public school to traditional public schools. That's through open enrollment. About 100,000 of those students utilize public charter schools, and then about 100,000 or so utilize private schools, Catholic schools, Jewish schools, etc. We have 5 voucher scholarship programs in the state of Ohio. One of them is the John Peterson Special Needs. My former state representative was the late John Peterson. He fought for autism issues and scholarships, and we've actually got one of the scholarship vouchers is named after him. 2 of them, Ed Choice and Ed Choice Expansion, are 2 of the other scholarships that are given out, or vouchers. And then Cleveland has their own version, and there's a couple of those. So that makes up to 5 different ones. Of those 5 different scholarships, you might think that they've taken all the money from traditional public schools. But if you add up all the scholarships that are available for all of the school choice things such as Ed Choice or the John Peterson Special Needs, they make up 1.55% of all funding in the state of Ohio for primary and secondary education. The Ed Choice scholarships make up 0.6% of all the funding for education in primary and secondary. For those that don't know, we spend about $23 billion per year in primary and secondary education in the state of Ohio. The current school funding system is capped and has guarantees, and by that, if you're a school district that has lost students over time, and that's most of the urban school districts, you're still maintaining funding as if those students were there. So you're basically guaranteed funding, and that's several hundred million per year that is staying in those school districts for students who no longer are going to those school districts. In the case of the cap districts, like the ones I represent, like Olentangy, about 25 years ago, Olentangy had about the same amount of students as my alma mater, Buckeye Valley, which is just up the street. And they had about 2,300 students in it. Today, Olentangy is going to be crossing 23,000 students, and they're expected to pass 27,000 to 30,000 students within the next 10 years. They are capped, however. How many of you in here, if you want to, by quick show of hands, pay more than $10,000 a year in property taxes? Okay, there's a few of you in here. You're probably in a suburban school district, most likely. In the case of Olentangy district, I think almost everybody in there is paying about $10,000 to $12,000 in property taxes, most of which goes to the public schools. And the reason we do that is because of the cap part. And under the cap portion, what happens is those school districts that are growing do not receive those marginal dollars from the state. So when they gain 700 students, they don't gain 700 students times what the funding formula says. Instead, they have to wait for 2 more years of lag because we have what's called a biennial budget, so we pass it every 2 years, which was passed last July in this particular case. But what that means is that Olentangy should be funded $42 million more per year under the school funding formula, but they aren't because of guarantees going to other school districts that are guaranteed funds for students who have left. That's created a disparity in the school funding. Now, Governor DeWine proposed, and the General Assembly supported, along with myself, wellness funds, which are basically funds for kind of like wraparound services for health and mental health issues and health issues. And we put $675 million into this biennial budget for that, for the state of Ohio. And it is allotted based on a student calculation basis, as is all the rest of the school funding in the state. In fact, the primary and secondary finance subcommittee will be actually taking a look at this. We will be traveling around the state to take a look at school districts and how they're utilizing those funds to see that the best evidence-based systems are in fact working. For instance, we want, if kids are having mental health problems, that those are being addressed, because the point of that, which has actually been pointed out here earlier about this extra spending, is if kids, number one, are being fed a lot, they've got other wraparound services. I know in Cincinnati, a large chunk of their schools are pretty much tons of wraparound services, because kids who can't learn in class if their stomachs are empty and they've got problems at home due to drugs, parents aren't there, whatever the issues may happen to be. So I was taking a look. I just want to mention what some of the numbers are here from some of these school districts so that you do know what they are. I used Centerville City School District. This is from what's called the CUP reports. If you Google CUP, C-U-P-P, CUP Peterson, which I'll mention briefly, they came up with their school funding formula in this last General Assembly. But here in Centerville, the expenditure per pupil is about $13,952. The revenue per pupil in Centerville is only $13,170. So that's according to the Ohio Department of Education's CUP report. Olentangy, by comparison, our expenditures per pupil are $11,671. Olentangy did this year get an A on the report card pretty much across the board. Their revenue per pupil is basically the same at $11,921 per student. Now I'm going to go into a couple of the school districts that are a lot more expensive. Youngstown City Schools. Now this school district has, for all practical purposes, failed for 20-some years. African American graduation rates and performance are atrocious. We're spending in Youngstown City Schools per pupil $18,072 with revenues per pupil of almost $27,000 per student. And you can get these all on the Department of Education website and download it. It's a CUP report, and you can pull that up. And I'll get you, I think, one more here. Dayton City Schools. Dayton City Schools expenditure per pupil 2019 $15,397 per student. The funding formula per pupil, and this includes other things and other services, $24,260 per student. I bring those up because I had proposed actually a couple different school funding mechanisms. Because of the caps and guarantees, we have got a school funding system that is so messed up that we probably need to bulldoze it and start over. Probably need to do that with the Department of Ed as well. I was told by a friend of mine what we ought to do is to take the Ohio Department of Education, bulldoze it into the Scioto River, and pay the EPA fines. That actually might not be a bad idea, but anyway. So my concern was, okay, so what do we do? Because we've had this discussion. I agree. I think that DeRolf is technically, if you take a look at the most progressive states in school funding, Ohio is at the top of the list. Now, you may not agree or think that that's the case, but in fact it is. I think it's Ohio, Utah, and there's like one other state that is at the top of the list for being the most progressive, meaning the school districts that have the least amount of resources get the most, and vice versa. The worst are like Illinois, New York, and a couple in Texas are some of the most regressive as far as the funding going from the districts that need it. So my idea is an idea where we move completely away from the current school funding system. We eliminate the need for local levies. You have it all collected at the state. You have 100% of the money follow the student to whatever school they go to that is a public school. And we would still have scholarships available for those that want to go to private schools for like special needs and other things. But under that system, we would also shift it away from property taxes. So we would go basically a third income, a third sales, and a third property. And we have stability. You have the ability to grow when the economy grows, but you also have the stability of the property tax, but not so overwhelming that it kicks senior citizens out of their homes and people on fixed income. I proposed it in the last 2 General Assemblies. I'm working on it in this current one. I think it also needs to come with massive deregulation so then the local schools can run themselves. And I think that can happen. Unfortunately, we also have to get around federal law, and I would hope that we would change it. Actually, Betsy DeVos, one of the biggest disappointments I have is that she hasn't done that. I would love to see actually a lot of the return of the education power back to the states, back to the state of Ohio, so we could actually control our own education system. But anyway, from a school funding standpoint, I think that's where we would need to move to. Cup Patterson, which I mentioned before, that would be Representative Cup and Representative Patterson. One's a Republican, Cup, the other one is a Democrat. Patterson from different parts of the state, and they came up with a school funding formula that basically says, okay, how much does it cost to educate a student based on certain criteria, whether they're gifted, have disabilities, or whatever, and then just come up with a new formula on that, or at least revise the current one. They have it. It's been stuck in the House of Representatives, and I don't expect it will move forward because I think a lot of the numbers that were coming out of there surprised a lot of people as to how much more would be needed. I think that that is something that the state's going to have to eventually take a look at, but we've already got enough problems because we've got currently caps and guarantees going on, so we've got to eliminate those issues. But under my school funding formula, when I proposed it, I also assumed that the state of Ohio assumed all the bond debt of every local school district, and in doing so, freeing up those districts of all their debt, they could then reorganize and manage their districts more efficiently. If they could do that, then we'd actually save money as a state through interest, because actually we'd be able to lower the bond ratings and the cost of the interest that we're borrowing on all the school buildings and everything throughout the state, the tune of $150 million plus per year. So I think that these are things that need to be looked at, and I'll be around here a bit for some question and answer. So I wanted to touch on those just to let you know kind of from a perspective of somebody from the General Assembly. Thank you.
My name is John Morrow. I'm not an educational professional at all. I am an economist, and I was involved with helping in the early 90s the New Zealand education system. A lot of this goes to do with financing. I myself am a capitalist. I would love to see our teachers be paid very well, as long as we have a very good education. I think that performance-based is good, but I also think that our laws prevent our teachers from doing as well as what they can. And so I do think that there's a lot of room for improvement if we are to compare New Zealand with Ohio. There's a lot of differences between the countries, or between the state and the country. New Zealand's less than half the size of Ohio as far as population. They do have minorities, but probably not to the point as that we have here. and there are other socio-economic problems that New Zealand has that are different from Ohio. So this is just a suggestion or a vision of what worked in New Zealand. Doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work here. Okay, so the first thing that we had after it was called Rogernomics in New Zealand, the Prime Minister there had really messed things up very badly in the economy. And about 80% of the people that were over 80 years old were getting evicted from their houses, and that was because of property taxes. They, much like Ohio, funded a majority of their school system through property taxes. And so one thing to look at here is, we do live, and we can argue about, it's a spectrum. On the spectrum, we are living in a socialist state. The reason why I say that is we don't own our property. If we don't pay our property taxes, we get our property taken away from us. So we never truly own our property. And I think that's a bad thing. I think anybody that owns an expensive piece of property pays a high amount of property tax, or even if you pay have a modest property and pay little tax, that I think that you'll agree that that tax really hurts. And it really hurts the older that you get, especially when you start living on a fixed income and you're having your property taxes being raised and your income's not raising at the same point in time. So that's one of the big problems that we want to look at is, the school levies and additional millages normally exacerbate putting the elderly out of their homes. Now, I don't know in Ohio if there's an exception to the rule. If you're over 65, you don't pay that property tax. I'm not sure. I'm not up on that. Okay, so I look at this as being government brilliance 101. Evict the elderly out of their house because they couldn't pay the tax. Now they need a place to live. Government will pay for the government housing, and now your taxes go up. And that essentially leads to a higher and higher degree spectrum of socialism, and the government controlling your everyday life. That you've got to depend on them for where you live. I'm telling you. Okay. Building privilege class. So you have your over here, you have your school board, you have your teachers union, which they're fighting. They're fighting for their teachers. They want to get them more money. If you're a capitalist, you can't argue with that. That's what they want to do. But when the teachers get better pay conditions, the taxpayer has to work longer hours for these better wages here. And again, it's how good these guys fight in that fight. So in collective bargaining, what we have right now is that you'll have your school board meet with your teachers union. They'll negotiate a collective bargaining agreement. Then it'll go back to the teachers union to be able to approve that. Well, we found that these guys here, they have a conflict of interest, or they did in New Zealand, because these guys here would donate to their campaign funds. They would go ahead and support, push out, these candidates here who they want to get elected, and then these guys, would feel compelled for a quid pro quo to be able to give the raises that they wanted for the teachers so that these guys stay in power. If you look here, the taxpayers not in this equation. So what we did in New Zealand is that you'll have your school board come meet with your union, negotiate a contract, goes back to the teachers union for approval. After it goes there for approval, and if it gets approved, then it goes to an automatic referendum, and it's voted on by the people. So another thing that we had in New Zealand is that we have a lot of soaring costs. We had, much like here in Ohio, there were green building codes, mandates saying that we have to use solar panels and everything. If you look at what square foot commercial costs in Ohio is $170 per square foot, $245 per square foot for the cost of school. And the schools aren't lasting as long as what they once did because of the materials that they're using for the green building codes. Now something that could last 80 to 100 years is lasting 50 to 60 years. So the concept that we should all look at embracing, and this is my personal feeling, I'm sure it's not everybody's here, but we need to implement the parity laws that will stop any type of conflict of interest that the school board will have in approving these. We need to stop taxing property, and as we go on, I'll show you how we got rid of taxing property. We need to look at reducing the litigation exposure. Teachers have a trying time. You'll have troubled students, you'll have bad teachers, you'll have bad students. And a lot of times those bad students, because you are mandated, you have to by law take care of those students, they take up an inordinate amount of your time. And then the other students, they're not taught as well because you're focusing on some of those problem children that are in your school. And we have a solution for that as well. We need to allow the private sector to get more involved in education. And I know a lot of people will wince at that notion, but I think as is explained how it happened in New Zealand, it's a little bit better. I think that a lot of people will gravitate towards it. But, come on. There we go. So one of the things that we did in New Zealand right off the bat is to create a distance learning program. We changed the dynamic. Now, here in Ohio, I'm told that we had a disaster called ECOT. At least even my conservative friends and my liberal friends, they've all said it was a total disaster. I don't know, I haven't reviewed it, so I'm not going to make a judgment on it. But the distance learning program in New Zealand is done by the state, and it changes the dynamic. And what I mean by the dynamic is the dynamic of responsibility for education of the children. Right now, in the state of Ohio and most of America, it is the state's responsibility to make sure that that child gets an education. In New Zealand, we changed that. We said it's the parents' responsibility, and that the schools stand ready to assist in that responsibility. So if you have a problem student, you can send them home and they can educate themselves through the platform that's provided by the public school. So this here, these show all these private schools, but this would actually be run by the state. It would be a state-based program. The Ohio State Board of Education would run it, would put it out. One of the ways that they got content is that they started putting cameras in the schoolrooms and microphones to be able to record. You know, if Miss Betty Butler is your teacher, fourth grade teacher, well, you can watch her on television teach that class if you're homesick, or if you've been bad and you've got expelled from school, you can still watch and see that class. So one thing that we found from distance learning is that you can put an advertising platform on there to help offset those costs. So you've got some of the bad students out of the class. You got some teachers that might do better as far as coaching students one-on-one. You get more time with that. The advertising platform brings more money in to be able to help offset those costs. businesses that are looking to hire trained students, they can offer classes on the platform. If you're looking at education companies, they can cover costs for premium classes, like if you want to learn like Adobe Illustrator or something like that, they can offer it on there and they can have the parents pay for it. Let's look at, the primary function of the school board becomes testing and managing distance learning platform. Another thing that we did is that we said, okay, at the state level or the province level there, they don't set any standards. They have minimums, but they don't set graduation standards. If a school board, like myself, I don't care about any other country. If parents don't care that their children aren't being educated, then that's their problem. And we found that the educational standards rose once you got rid of the state level that had a requirement for graduation, because now you had competition between the school districts, and the school districts would compete to be able to bring in the students. And what was that through? That was through a voucher program. And so the schools that were really good, they got more students in there, and they graduated them at a higher, and so there was a lot of competition. Right now, there's not competition. Come on. I think this thing's running. Okay, so this is what an Ohio State Board of Education would look like underneath the New Zealand system. Mission and vision. You would not have an educator set that. That would be the legislature. They would say, this is what your mission and this is what your vision is. So they're telling them what they should do. They're their boss. That's the way that it became in New Zealand. They also decided what a contract with Ohio parents would be, and that's what legislators said. They said, these are the minimum things that you must teach these students so that they can go out in the world. But the local school district had local control and could set what their graduation levels were. So then you have testing centers. If you're a public school, you have a testing center so that homeschool students, which they get vouchers, but they're paid on a performance basis. So if that child comes in and takes a test in the testing center and gets a 0%, well, guess what? The homeschool parents get $0. If you get an A, well then if you're paying $10,000 per year and they average an A all year, well then the homeschool students' parents would get $10,000. Distance learning platforms, that's what the Ohio State Board of Education underneath this system would primarily be in charge of. So this is a similar type of contract with parents, and this you can see on these what would be similar: how to do your dishes, proper hygiene, how to sew, how to change a light bulb, how to jump your car, how to change a tire. So by the time that you graduate, people know how to do these things to be actual live. I mean, a lot of people laugh at that, but there are children that are graduating and they don't know. So right now, the current mission of the Ohio State Board of Education, this is what it is. The State Board of Education's vision is for all Ohio students to graduate from the pre-K to 12 education system with the knowledge, skills, and behaviors necessary to successfully continue their education and or be workforce ready and successfully participate in the global economy as productive citizens. Ultimately, all students will graduate well prepared for success. That's what the mission is. I would argue that's a vision. That's not a mission. So, it's probably arrogant of me to call it the correct mission, but this is what I would view as being a better mission. And probably the most controversial of the bunch is allegiance. To develop a strong common bond among students, faculty, and the community of allegiance and patriotism to the United States and to Ohio. There are a lot of people that hate America and are not going to like that. But that strong common bond is what makes New Zealand much more successful than Ohio. Right now, when you look at Ohio, we're 11 million people. They're about 4.4 million people, so they're less than half the size. And we have it's somewhere around $600 billion gross domestic product, and they have a 440 billion gross domestic product. So their gross domestic product per capita is much higher than what ours is. So drive to instill a generational aspiration for themselves and their children to achieve more. That's very important. That's a good mindset to have. It's very productive. It has, it helps to have more productive people and a more productive society. Unity, to produce active participants and citizens in creating a strong civil society united by a common bond that values diversity of thought and unity of purpose. This is trying to bring people together instead of breaking them apart. We can teach about all the warts that America has, but if we just focus on the warts, we're driving people apart. And if we stand together, we're much stronger as a nation. So I'm not saying that we don't teach our warts, just not focus on them, as sometimes that happens. So ambition and opportunity, to recognize personal responsibility and rugged individualism, and to have the choice and opportunity to pursue exceptionalism. There's so many people nowadays, and we do have a problem with some parts of our capitalism where there are some fascist elements to it that are preventing a lot of people from moving forward. And that, is discouraging and has a lot of people in despair. And so we do need to change some other things with our economy to help with that. But helping push that, I think, is very important. To produce a productive and valued adults that are competitive in the world. I think that goes without saying that we should do that. That students drive the United States and Ohio to lead globally. I think those are noble endeavors. State school funding. This is essentially, in New Zealand, you have states, you have the funding that comes from the state, and you have the funding that comes from local. So you have 50% normally comes, and this is just rule of thumb, 50% of the taxation comes from property insurance premiums. So on your car, on your house, motorcycle, boat, airplane, that's property insurance. You got a 20% tax rate on that. So you have no property tax, but you have tax on your insurance premiums, 20% tax on your insurance premiums. Here you have a one-time sales tax, which is 6% on your property. So if you're buying a $100,000 house, you got 6% tax on it, you're paying $106,000 for it. So it's more money up front, but you only pay that once. You're never thrown out of your house for it. So if you're old and you can't afford your insurance, you can drop your insurance and still live in your house. So that's where 30% of the funds come from. 10% of the funds, a sin tax on pornography, 20% for static images, $20 for club entry, and 25 cents per minute for free streaming video. Really helps to help the family unit become better. It doesn't outlaw pornography. I mean, I'm sure they love their pornography, but right here, you're going to help the family so that people that don't have an addiction to it, or they're limited to what they can get. And then a 10% entry fee on local bingo, or 10% comes from entry fee on local bingo and card halls, and a $40 fee on entry to casinos. So just like when you go to Cedar Point, you're going to pay probably $40 or $50 to get through Cedar Point. That's the same way with the casino. You got to pay $40, and that goes there. Now they don't tax your winnings, so that's another benefit. Local school funding. Educational port authorities, this is to pay for your buildings and schools. So everything else was just for operation. That goes for paying your teachers and everything. So educational port authority, you get into your district and say, hey, we all want to build a school and we all are fine with being, paying this tax. And, the tax can be on, whatever the community decides they want to put it on. Additional retail sales tax is something that local funding can do. That can only be used for teacher bonuses. School sports program, that's an additional tax on alcohol and tobacco. Community public-private partnership schools. Over there, it's like if you want to have a community center, it's not separate from your school. A school's cafeteria might have 3 different restaurants in it, and it's a public-private partnership. If you want to have a lifting center, well, the whole community can come in and use it. And so the school system builds the facilities, and then they contract these out to private companies to be able to offer these inside the school, and they make some profit off of it that they can pay their teachers better. So that's all I had to say. So thank you.
Okay, we were just going to take a few minutes, each person, to kind of recap and maybe, at least in my case, give a list of possible solutions to the problems that we're seeing. And we've been discussing all night. So one of the things that we did in Springboro that was extremely effective is we went to zero-based budgeting. Most businesses use zero-based budgeting. That's where you start at the ground level, and in our case we said, every teacher, please submit your budget for the year that includes all of the supplies and materials you will need for the year. And nobody said no to that submitted budget, unless the principal did, but the board did not. We wanted to fund every teacher at the classroom level with everything they thought they needed. If the principal thought there was something on their list they didn't need, that was a discussion between them. But we didn't want any teacher to have to say, I had to pay for things on my own, because that's not right. If you're in a job, that job and that provider should provide all of the needs for that student. And the teacher is the best one to decide that. When we went to zero-based budgeting, that teacher at every classroom level sent their budget forward to the principal. The principal added their part to the budget. That went forward to the administration. The administration added their portion to it. So what was left at the end of the day, which is the opposite of what's typically done, but what's typically done is that 85 to 90% of the budget is fenced off for pay and benefits. And then that doesn't leave enough for supplies and materials. So if you do it the other way around and you start at the classroom level and you fund 100% of what that classroom needs and you move up the ladder, what gets shorted might be some administrative things, might be, or you say, look, we have 5% left of our budget. Now, let's figure out the raises and benefits from that. So it's a different scenario, but we found that we didn't need the $30 million that the district wanted in the levies. We found that we actually found that $30 million plus another $12 million when we did it that way. That's an option. The other thing is put the negotiated agreement, which I think somebody alluded to, put the negotiated agreement on the ballot. Since the negotiated agreements between the 2, sometimes 3 unions, constitute 85 to 90% of the budget, why shouldn't that go on the ballot? Let the voter decide if those pay and benefits are reasonable and affordable. But when you say that it's for the kids, and we know that the majority is not necessarily for the kids, it's for the adults, then I think the community gets kind of frustrated. Put the negotiated agreement on the ballot, let them decide on that. Another thing is a transparency project we did in Springboro. We put all kinds of financial information right on our website so that it decreased the total number of public records requests, because the treasurer could simply send those people the link to the transparency project that had all kinds of financial information on it. That worked really well, decreased her job. Let 100% of the money in school systems follow the child. So if the child, if let's say, you know, Springboro is right now at $8,200 per pupil, or maybe $8,700 per pupil. If a pupil leaves and goes to a private school, then $8,700 should leave and go with that student. And I think one of them alluded to that. I think every community should do a community, or every district should do a community compensation and benefits survey, so that this disparity that we see between the community members and what's the economic disparity inside the district can be closed. Let's close that gap, because what happens when you do something like that is you say, well, our community is seeing a 1% increase in their incomes per year. So we're prepared to give a 1% increase in raises if we have the money, more if we have more. But what happens then is that everybody inside the district and everybody outside the district works to make that community more prosperous. Because as the community incomes go up, so should the people within inside the district see their incomes go up. See how everybody would work together? It wouldn't be this total separation of thoughts. It would be, let's work together to entice business to our area. School board members should be compensated just like every other elected official with the same pay. However, I don't believe any elected official should get the benefit packages that they're voting in for the people they work for. That's a conflict of interest. If they can join that healthcare system, then they're going to vote in a healthcare system that's unpaired with the community. School board members are not allowed to take the benefit packages. The school board members only get $125 per meeting, far, far, far less than any other elected official. If we want school board members to really do their job and hold the system accountable and do some of the homework that I showed up here, that I did while I was at Springboro, and by the way, Dayton Daily, which was not my favorite newspaper at the time, but in August 2013 wrote a pretty good article about the increase in academic success at Springboro while price tag per pupil went down during the 4 years that I was there. So if you want to find some positive articles, I wouldn't Google, I saw the chatter on Facebook, I would go to Dayton Daily. Board members should pay their own memberships to these trade or professional organizations. It costs about $10,000 a year for your school board members to belong to OSBA, but the same organization or an arm of the same organization is BASA and OASBO. Those two organizations lobby for the same things that OSBA does. We in Springboro decided to discontinue our membership because I really didn't feel like they did anything for us. And that money then was spent on third grade science books. And that's the way we thought it should be spent. Teacher salaries in Ohio, oh, I said that, I'm sorry. Surveying. I think that's my 6 items for solutions. Next is Beth.
So I was looking at solutions based upon who you are and what you do. So what's a school board to do? Lead. Your superintendents, contrary to what many of the alphabet education groups tell you, are your employees. So at both the local and state level, I really encourage you to take your responsibility for your schools seriously and direct your employees rather than allowing them to direct you. What's a teacher to do? When Student-Teacher Liberty Act is introduced this week or next, I encourage you to get behind that and push it so that you can take back more of your rights in the classroom. If you're overwhelmed with the amount of requirements that you have, make your voice heard to your legislator, because your job should be to teach, not to be a counselor and a parent and all the other hats that you're forced to wear. What's a taxpayer to do? Encourage your legislators to push for legislation like Senator Brenner's former House Bill 102 that he's talking about reintroducing, and understand how levies really work. You're going to often be told, not just on school levies, but just about anything, maybe you're going to have a renewal with a decrease. Over 95% of the time, a levy will be an increase, whether it says decrease or not, because it's based on your new property value. And the way levies are written in Ohio, they make it very confusing for a typical property owner. So know what those are. What's a parent to do?
Know what's happening in your school. Run for your local school board. They need you in there. Be your child's parent. Don't let the government or the government school take away your rights or your child's rights. And just get involved. Know what's being taught. And support your teachers. What's a student to do? Fight for your right to be educated and not indoctrinated. Keep your parents informed of everything that's going on at school. If you're uncomfortable with something that's happened in the classroom or at recess, tell your parents about it. And be kind to your teachers because they really want you to succeed. Not in Ohio, but throughout the nation, there are African American supporters of school choice, and they call the issue of education the civil rights issue of our time. We need strong parents, strong school board members, strong legislators, strong educators to stand up and put the needs of students before anyone else. That is our responsibility. Education is for students. It's time to put Ohio students first.
I guess as a summary, as a legislator, there are obviously 99 state representatives, 33 state senators, and several hundred different opinions on school funding. If you add that up, that doesn't add up to several hundred. Every legislator is hit from all sides, from the far right to the far left, people in the middle on school funding. We're hit, we have conflicts that are between the districts that even we represent. So like I said, I represent part of the city of Columbus. I represent Olentangy. Those are two completely different school systems within the state of Ohio. There's 600 and about 12, I think, school districts in the state of Ohio. There's about 400 community schools in the state of Ohio. You've got tons of independent schools and religious schools all over Ohio. So you've got a large amount of opinions that are diverse. So I would say to all of you out in the audience, when you're meeting with your legislators, just make note that those different opinions are coming from all different walks of life, all different regions of the state. So when it comes to school funding, there isn't an easy solution. There never has been and probably never will be. But it's a solution that we in the General Assembly keep working on. As I pointed out, Representatives Cupp and Peterson have introduced their bill. I've introduced one in the past here and am planning to reintroduce it again. So I think that there are different school funding systems and others that have been proposed in other nations. And what we try to do is we try to bring in the best that we can to try to get school funding to work, but it isn't an easy thing to do. If it were, we would have had it solved and we wouldn't be having this funding forum right now because everybody would be satisfied and at home probably watching future debates or something or replaying of debates that have been occurring recently. But I just want to thank the Dayton Women's Club for inviting us here this evening, and I'll be happy to answer questions when they come around.
Yes, I really, don't look at myself as being qualified to say what a solution would be for our district. I know what or for the state of Ohio. I do know what worked in New Zealand. Being able to empower the parents by making them responsible for the education of their children, I think is important. That changes the dynamic inside the school system. Being able to have a distance learning so that there are options. I think that helps to empower the teacher and to empower the other students that are in the class that really want to be educated versus the ones that may not want to be educated as much. And then I think taking away or having better local control and not having the state of Ohio dictate to the local districts what a graduation is, what you have to meet for graduation. That should be the parents, my thought, and then that the parents and school board, local school board should set what a graduation level is, how many credits you have to have, how many points you have to have. in order to be able to graduate. That provides competition and actually raises educational standards after that. And the thing that I'll tell you is that, you know, if you're paying a homeschool parent, let's say between $5,000 or $10,000 a year to educate their student, and they only get that if the student gets an A, and they got to go into these impartial, unbiased testing centers in order to be able to get that, guess what? Those kids their parents are paying more attention to them, and they're helping to get them engaged, because you're almost forcing them to be in their children's life if they weren't before. So.
All right. At this time, we'll start with questions. And the first question that we have, is there any association between single-parent homes and low-test stores? Anybody?
Not necessarily.
Okay, great. I have a question from our Facebook Live. Of the 30 countries doing better than the U.S. in math, how many of them accept all the children in public schools versus segregating students with special needs and students who don't score well on tests given at a certain age?
I did ask that question of PISA, and it was several years ago, because China is known to, gather their students in one location and educate, but they're typically not the rural students. The rural students have a different form of education. And so I asked them, are they able to do that? And again, China's one country out of a lot that are scoring better than the United States. And my suggestion is if China is able to cheat, you don't think that other countries are too. But also, PISA said they're not allowed to do that. It doesn't mean they don't cheat. It doesn't mean that. But they said they're not allowed. They are specific on their cross-section of their demographic, and they must choose students that are educated across China. Now, nobody's walking and making sure that each student comes from the demographic that's a good cross-section. We don't know that. But I think that if cheating is allowed, there are, again, another 29 countries scoring better than us that don't have that same accusation. And I would think that they would all be maybe guilty of picking out their best or upper echelon, including the United States. So there's no guarantee, but I don't think it's happening.
The next question is, why won't public schools answer our financial questions?
I don't understand the question. All the financial data is on the Ohio Department of Education's website. Like I said, if you want to download it, you just Google CUP report, C-U-P-P report 2019. It'll pop up and you'll be able to download it for every single school district in the state of Ohio. You can get all the data down to demographics and everything that you want on there. Most of that is input via EMIS, the Education Management Information System, that is the backbone of our data system for all of our schools in the state of Ohio. So that information should be readily available. If you're running into problems with your local school board, I would just suggest you talk to your local school board member and ask them to, if you're having problems there, or call the Ohio Department of Education.
The CUP report will also allow you to look at previous years and to compare your school to like school districts.
I think the question is probably referring to information that's not available on ODE. And people need to understand that the Ohio law says that your district must give you something that is a public document once you request it. However, there are lots of things in the district that you might be asking questions on that are not public documents, and the district has the legal right to say, no, we are not going to supply you with that. For example, this is not an example of that, but the CUP report doesn't have their monthly credit card statements, but you're entitled to those. The CUP statement doesn't have their monthly cell phone bills. Utility bills. It doesn't have a lot of information that the public has the right to know if they just ask. But the treasurer does not have to invent a public document. So if you asked for an analysis of raises among the administrators over the last 3 years, they don't have to do that. But I have to tell you that in 2010, when I was elected and sworn in, I started doing some homework. Under Governor Strickland, the Democrat, Ohio Department of Education website had far, far more information on it than it does now under Kasich and DeWine. A lot of hidden stuff. If it's there, it's not findable by someone like me that likes to go on. I'm a researcher. I like to go on and try to find information. It's not available anymore. I think that's pretty interesting. But always let your community know that your district is not responsive to your requests. It doesn't mean they have to legally provide it, but they should. And if they don't, let everybody know they're not answering your questions. That's a problem.
Okay, this is also rather a general question. Do you agree with education proposals presented by Education Secretary Betsy DeVos? I think it's about the eliminating education for homeless children and youth program.
I don't know anything about that.
I would say I wouldn't agree with it, but I think homeless children need to be educated as well. Education is private right as well as and I think we're much better off if we educate everyone.
Springboro, Centerville, and Delbrook schools are all rated B on the flawed state report system. Do you support this? Let's see what the $6 million in local taxpayer money is going to failing F&D rated charter schools. Do you support this?
I mean, I look at your public school as your school of your last resort. So it has to be supported. That's what I'm saying is that if they're not going to go to a public or to a private school, if their parents can't afford that, well then they go to the public school. So I think that yes, I mean that should be supported.
So yes, the report card system is badly broken, and I don't think you'd find too many people who would disagree with that. Unfortunately, it's the only measure that we have right now. I don't know, maybe some of you could tell me whether or not you have charter schools that are taking students from Centerville and your other local schools here, but they are supposed to be, except for the internet schools, brick and mortar charters have to be located within districts that are failing. And it's weird here in Ohio that we have only one party that somewhat supports the idea of charter schools, but across the nation, generally speaking, people in both parties support the idea of public charter schools, which is what we have. And the real comparison is between those charter schools and the schools in the district from which they are pulling students. So you cannot accurately compare the students in a public charter school in Dayton to the students who are in Centerville or Brookville, is it? Bellbrook, I'm so sorry. I don't know the area of Dayton as well as I know my Central Ohio area, so please forgive me.
I would just clarify in that, sorry, what was the question? Oh, the charter schools. In New Zealand, for example, the private schools, they're performance-based for their vouchers. So if their students are failing, they don't get any money and they go out of business very quickly. If they're graduating students that all have A's, well then they're going to get the full amount that would be equal to whatever the public school would have.
I would say, imagine this. Imagine that there is choices for parents. Parents have to do their homework on which school district is going to match their child's academic prowess, their principles of their family, and maybe one that's logistically closer. I don't know, but let's just say there's school A, B, and C. One is in a church, so it's a nonprofit. One's for-profit. One is a public system. What I would really like to see, having children that I don't think were disruptive, I think you should have the ability to remove a disruptive student and kick them out. It shouldn't take 5 strikes, 10 strikes. A teacher should be respected in the classroom, and if not, be able to say, this student's not allowed in my class. I can't teach them. They're dragging down everybody else. That should be good, right? But can I talk? So what happens is, there's school A, B, and C. Parents get to decide that I want to choose school A. If that student's not working out for school A can kick them out, and then that child has to go to their second choice. If that doesn't work out, then the parents have to say, well, gosh, John, you messed up and you can't go to school A, you can't go to school B, now I have to take you to school C or homeschool you. That's not an option. Parents get a lot more involved if they have to now, one, research the school district that they are thinking about sending their child to, and two, if their student doesn't behave in those classrooms, then they can be put in a different school system. But there could be a lot of options, but all of them involve the parent more, and all of them would allow a teacher to say, I'm not going to teach this student, they'll have to go to their second choice. If the money follows the student, that's how that would work.
What about the kids?
Let me follow up with the school funding portion of this. When we were discussing earlier, one thing I didn't touch on was charter schools. And many of these school districts where I said we're spending $16,000 plus per student or have revenues of upwards of $27,000 per student. Under the code, a typical kid going to a charter school, the maximum amount we can spend is $7,000 per student. Now, if these kids are going to schools where you can only spend $7,000 per student, yet and they're only can be located in the areas where they've got failing schools, and this would be the ones where we're spending $16,000 to $25,000 a student. How are we going to expect them to perform any better when all their support services are non-existent there? Well, not all non, but they've got to pull in a lot of extra help from outside, from other volunteers and other people trying to help those charters. The teachers that work in the charters aren't paid nearly as much as the teachers that are taught in traditional public schools. So the moment a teacher in a traditional, in a charter school gets an opportunity to leave because they get higher pay, they take it. So our charter schools have become schools where many teachers coming out of college, their first couple of years may be in a charter, and then they immediately go to a traditional public school, so the charter then has to start over and start to retrain new teachers. So we've got a school funding system where the charters are so massively, disproportionately funded compared to the traditional public schools that it is creating this disparity. So when you're talking about, okay, their report cards aren't as good. Well, no, if you compare them, a traditional charter school, say, to one like Olentangy, which has an A on the report card, no, they're not going to be. But when you take a look at where that building is, or where that charter school is, compared to the schools around it, they outperform them. And actually that shows up on the report cards. Now you may not, and actually they do, because you can go look, and go to the Ohio Department of Education website, look at their report cards, and then drill down to the dollars spent in per classroom, per student, in these charter schools, and you'd be surprised to find that the charter schools spend more dollars per student in the classroom than traditional public schools where they're located, based on the percentages of the dollars spent. Now they don't have all the additional money for additional wraparound services, although the wellness funds that we put in the state budget do include charter schools, because those kids need the help just as much, if not more, than even maybe some of the other schools where they're located. So the school report card, does it need additional changes? Yes, we did. We put some in the budget just last year to deal with value add. That's the one that hurts almost all the traditional public schools when you're dealing with marginal improvement. But if a school district's at 95% of their students and they don't get to the 97th percentile, we give them a C or D, that's not right. So we actually put that in the state budget to say, okay, well, if you're at the 95th percentile, we're going to leave you where you need to be, because honestly, you're doing a good job. We shouldn't be hurting you for that. So that was an area that wasn't fixed in the budget. It should hopefully turn up in next year's state report cards. There are other areas of the performance index and some other stuff we need to take a look at. Maybe we need to go to something similar to what Beth Lear suggested, which is eliminate. Let me tell you about something about how our state, I carried the bill for the governor 6 years ago. This was the bill that had the standardized tests, and it actually was a college credit plus, for those that don't know, which I think has actually been successful in of its own. But the state superintendent at the time wanted 10 end-of-course exams. I wanted 4. We compromised on 7, which is why it ended up at 7 to begin with. So that was a compromise. Compromises don't always work. We've just recently reduced that to 5 standardized tests, and hopefully we can reduce the number of hours needed for those tests substantially lower, or go to something that I was proposing, which was what Kelly suggested earlier, which is use maybe the NAEP scores or some other scores that are being used at like, local testing, and then index that so that we know what's going on. That way you don't need to take the other tests. That was rejected, unfortunately, because I think that's federal law that rejected that, but anyway.
Okay. Hey, I'm going to have to ask you to limit your answers to 1 minute. We have 15 minutes and we have a pile. How many of your sources come from bipartisan peer-reviewed studies? This is a question.
What was the question?
How many of your sources come from bipartisan peer-reviewed studies? I don't even know what that means.
I know what a peer-reviewed study is, but we're working on legislation in the General Assembly, so the public comes in and testifies. That includes, teachers, it includes superintendents. I'm not sure.
Sure. Anyone else? Okay. What is the ratio requirement in Ohio for student to teacher, and who determines what the ratio will be in individual schools? Are aides, volunteers, assistants, etc. included in this ratio requirement?
All these, pretty much all those are based on local contracts with the teachers' unions and the local school boards. Those are all negotiated. Nothing is set by state statute.
This question is for John Morrow. As an economist, you look at data, and last year the state of Ohio dispersed nearly $137 million in overpayment to charters due to inaccurate enrollment data. I guess that's ECOT, now shuttered, owes about $35 million we will never see. Do you think taxpayers' money should go to schools, charters who are not accountable?
I think everybody should be accountable. There should be a performance-based standard for a voucher system. Really I think the lowest standard for accountability, as it is in New Zealand, there are conservatives that do not like that. They actually have the lowest standard, and but that is the state minimum that they have. The graduation, as far as being able to graduate, that's determined by local control. And so I think, you want to keep the money local. It's whatever the parents want for their kids, for their school district. I mean, if a parent wants to send their child to a charter school, I think it's up to them. But if they're getting F's, I don't think they should get a dang dime.
There's an entirely different story about what really happened to ECOT than what was going on in the newspaper, but what I don't understand is why so many people are concerned about the money that they allegedly misspent, and they don't care about the 12,000 students that were put on the street in the middle of the school year, thanks to a decision made by the state superintendent and some others. 2,000 of those kids never found their way back in the classroom. Those are kids whose lives are likely going to be put into either prison or drugs or into the ground. We need to do better, and just attacking choice is not the best idea. Those kids were there because that's what their parents wanted, and the state made sure that they could not continue their education.
All right. This one is for Kelly Kohls. Why does the state education department insist that districts maintain cash reserves for rainy days? i.e., Vandalia Butler over the last 24 months has cash on hand of 15 to 25 million. And in the meantime, they put a 5-year long, due to expire, on the March ballot.
I think we need to ask Andy. I don't think that's law. We didn't do it in Springboro. We just said, no, that's operating funds. We're not going to set aside a mountain of someone else's money. That made no sense. We had new income every year. There was no reason to have this bucket full of cash sitting off to the side. We didn't do it.
Most of that's local school board. I mean, you have to set money aside for, buildings, infrastructure, so you have to have cash reserves for that. So that's part of what the cash reserves are for, and those are required based on, otherwise you're just not going to get bonded for your school levies. So there's money that's sitting there, but it's going to be drawn down over a period of time, which is why the state of Ohio does require a 5-year budget review and outlook, so that we can see, so school districts can see, okay, where are their cash funds going to be in 1, 2, 5 years, and plan for that. In the case of like one district I represent, Olentangy, they've got to do a lot of planning to cover those costs because of the massive student growth that they've had.
Okay, thank you. Schools are no longer just about educating our kids. They have a very large profit-making enterprise, expensive levy consultants, enormously costly sports and band programs. What would be your suggestions for holding our schools more financially accountable for educating our kids and not financing these endless spending programs that not everyone can or wants to participate in?
Well, one of the things we did in Springboro is we hired an athletic director and said, your job is to market the athletics program. We didn't want any of the $1 million for our athletics programs to come out of general funds. We decided that that money was there to educate kids, and that if sports were offered, which we were fine with, we had the grounds already, that they needed to pay for themselves. So our new hire athletic director, his job was to come up with $1 million. Variety of ways. They were able to do almost all of that. It's marketing, mostly marketing. It's bringing in the gate receipts. It's a whole lot of things. But they were able to fund sports separate from general funds. It's doable. They just have to think outside the box.
Thank you. How would flatlining and reducing funding impact students and their opportunities, local economics, and communities? Positives and negatives, please. Okay.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay. Right, that's all I have. Once teachers know about how the new education is going to lay off tens of thousands of teachers, why do they keep paying their dues? That doesn't even, okay.
I think
That's
that
a
was,
easy question.
yeah, I think that's, people out there have gotten a hold of a lot of federal documents, and Common Core's objective eventually was to identify the best of the best teachers, right? The teachers who indoctrinated the best, in my opinion. But once they get done doing that, there will be selected few teachers that will be put online, so that every child that has that laptop, that teacher is going to be on their laptop. They've started calling teachers facilitators, no longer calling them teachers. They believe that a facilitator in each classroom can handle 125 students. Those are the documents they've put in the federal documents, okay? That's their words. So if that's the case, we're going to be laying off a lot of teachers in the very near future once the evaluation, the accountability piece is closed. Once that's all done, there will be no need for most of the teachers, 2/3 of the teachers we have. We will have the one filmed, she or he will be on the screen of the children's laptops. All of the curriculum is on the laptop. All we need is a facilitator. Why would you pay somebody to protect your rights when that's the objective of Common Core? You've got to look into that stuff.
Okay, thank you. Are teachers' starting salaries low?
That was a research project, actually, just looked at one today. So there was a project that showed the starting salary of all majors, so all degrees, all the bachelor's degrees combined. It's Google it, you can find it, is $52,000. The average starting salary of a teacher today, remembering that $52,000 is for a 12-month contract, but the average starting salary for a teacher today is about $44,000, I believe. So if you divide that by the months worked, teacher salaries are actually above the average.
Unless you're looking at charter schools, and then their salaries are extremely low, in the low to mid-20s often starting.
Aren't there also taxpayer-funded things other than the salaries? Don't taxpayers also pay for benefits for the teachers?
Yes.
And what kind of benefits do they pay for? What kind of benefits?
Well, I've looked at SERB. So SERB site has all of the negotiated agreements for all the school districts. They have police, they have city workers, all of those. When I've looked at that, I've seen that a typical school district pays about 85% of the health care costs for a family benefit. They pay for 100% of the dental, usually 100% of vision. They pay life insurance policy. They pay a variety, there's several other things in that, but it's a pretty significant benefit package, and that's often why teachers did choose to work as a teacher in the past when the pay was low. I'm not saying that is now. I don't really care. I don't think most people care what that salary is. I think what they care about, or benefits, what they care about is the disparity between their own community's income and ability to pay the bill, and their increase in income being 1% per year, whereas somebody else in a protected class, economic class, is getting more like 3 to 4 or 5 times that. They know themselves in these households, they can't keep up with this. They just can't. I'm going to have to go to the last, we're down to the why is it okay? Okay, that's that. We already answered the charter school question. I'm sorry, these were ended. What can a teacher do that disagrees with her union's political spending and progressive values?
The answer is Janice. It was a decision made by the Supreme Court that effectively gave right to work to all teachers in the entire nation, and in the state of Ohio, teachers who are uncomfortable with how the unions are spending their money, whether they're donating to Planned Parenthood or whether they're giving it to a local politician who disagrees with their values. Every teacher has the right to leave the union and pay no dues at any time. At any time.
And this question is for Dr. Brenner. Is the 1/3 income in your proposed plan earned income?
Well, first of all, that is a mistake. It should have been Kelly Kohls, I believe, is the doctor. I'm not a doctor, but thanks for that. I guess I play one on TV. I do watch a lot of doctor shows, but it would be on earned income. Yeah, I mean, it would be income taxes, sales tax, and property taxes, the way I set up the proposal. So, for instance, there are many school districts that have opted right now to go to income taxes directly. So, that's out there right now. The local school district can do that. But I will be moving it away from property taxes to a sales and income tax-based system.
What assessments are used for PISA? What's your plan for students with physical, cognitive disabilities under this model?
I don't understand the question.
Okay.
What are you going to do with special ed kids under your model?
Yeah.
What model? What are you talking about?
Your plan.
Your plan. A school, they get kicked out of there. B school, where do they go? What are their choices?
Okay. That's not my plan. I'm suggesting that we need alternatives to what we currently have. If you like your public school, you can keep it. And because the state already offers extra money for those students, I would say that the A, B, and C schools have the option of competing for those students as well. Because often a school district these days, a public school system, wants those students. They bring in a large share of money, and often they want to attract those students. So I would suggest that school A, B, and C are going to want to do the same thing. And then that parent gets to pick which of those school districts is going to do the best for my special ed student. Again, the onus is on the parent to pick the school district that's going to work best for their student. If they have a high COG student, they pick the district that does the best for a high COG. If they've got a special needs student, they pick the district that tends to those special needs students the best. But it sounds like there's more money that comes with those special needs students. And unfortunately, some of the school districts, even though they've defined gifted students, they don't serve them all. As long as they don't have to, they don't serve them all. I see that in Centerville. If you look at more details under their report card, you'll see that 17% of the student body is identified as gifted, but only something like 12%, 13% are receiving services. So I think if parents got involved, they would look at that and say, you know what, I've got a gifted student, I'm going to go over here to this school district because they're going to service my gifted student.
Okay, thank you very much. We are at time, so I'm really sorry I didn't get to ask all of these questions.